Croeso. Welcome everyone, and thank you so much for coming to help us celebrate the 50th anniversary of the South Wales Miners Library. It's actually our anniversary today. We opened 50 years ago today on the 20th of October 1973. So I'm Sian Williams, and I've had the privilege of being the librarian at the South Wales Miners Library since 1995, so 28 years. And the South Wales Miners Library was established as the result of the Coalfield History Project, a Swansea University project funded by the Social Science Research Council between 1971 and 1974. The project had the strong support of the National Union of Mine Workers in the South Wales area. And for the past 50 years, the South Wales Miners Library has been the repository for the printed collections, banners of the National Union of Mine Workers in South Wales. Wayne Thomas, its area secretary, is unfortunately unable to be with us this evening, but he sends his very best wishes. And sadly, our president, Sally Burton, unfortunately, she has not been able to join us either, but she sends her congratulations and warm wishes to everybody this evening. Happily, our Vice-Chancellor, Professor Paul Boyle, is here, and I will hand over to the Vice-Chancellor shortly. But before I do that, I just want to remember two very special people in the history of the South Wales Miners Library. Our dear colleague, Julie Kame, and our extraordinary founder, Dr. Howell Francis. They both passed away within a month of each other in 2021. One of Julie's favourite bands was public service broadcasting, so you can imagine how excited she was when a certain J. Willgoose Esquire not only contacted the South Wales Miners Library, but actually spent several weeks at the library doing research. She was only too happy to be the one making cups of tea and getting out all the material that was required. Howell, on the other hand, I don't think he'd ever heard of public service broadcasting, but Howell, being Howell, took great interest in everybody who was doing research in the library, and so was only too pleased to come along and meet Mr. Willgoose and offer sage advice. We are delighted that members of both Julie and Howell's family are here with us this evening. We miss them both dearly and dedicate this evening in grateful thanks to them both. I now would like to ask Vice-Chancellor Professor Paul Boyle to introduce.
Noswaith ar pawb, and good evening everyone, and welcome to Swansea University, for any of you that have not been here before. Thank you all very much indeed for being with us on this very special evening. It really is a milestone event. The university, of course, is extremely proud of what we've been able to support over many years, and tonight is really a celebration of that. So, first of all, I'd just like to repeat and sort of echo Sian's kind words in respect of both Julie Kame and also Howell Francis, without whom, of course, we would not be here tonight. The 50th anniversary of the South Wales Miners Library is, of course, very much down to the work that they did, and we really are here to respect that, but also to think about the future of this library. So I'm delighted that this event is dedicated to them both. I think, as we've already heard, on the 20th of October 1973, at the formal opening of the Miners Library, Professor Glanmore Williams perfectly summarised our university's long-standing sense of duty and civic mission. He remarked, "Our own college here in Swansea has since its inception been strongly aware of its responsibility to the people of this region." And in the 50 years since, we've been proud to continue that strong sense of commitment to our local community here in West Wales and beyond. Our university, of course, is honoured to continue to act as a guardian and caretaker of a number of unique collections, including the one we're here to celebrate today, the South Wales Miners' Library. And on the behalf of the people of the Coalfields and of Wales and beyond, we're very proud that we're able to do that. A 50th anniversary heralds a critical inflection point for any organisation. It encourages you not just to reflect on the past, but also to think about the future. And that, of course, is what we hope to do tonight and as we go forward. We, of course, in this event are reasserting our commitment to the future of the South Wales Miners' Library. And many of you will be aware that we've put a lot of work in. There's a team of people who've now secured Heritage Lottery funding to pay for studies to think about what the future of this library should be. Obviously, we're particularly keen to make sure it's available for students, for staff, for researchers, and the general public, both today and tomorrow. We have a very exciting evening ahead, of course, and shortly I'll hand over to Professor Di Smith to say a few words. But before I do, I just want to mark briefly Di's own outstanding contribution to the development of the South Wales Miners' Library. Many of you will know that this evening's lecture has been kindly sponsored by the Rhys Davies Trust, and we're extremely grateful for their long-standing support. So, diolch yn fawr, Di. But Di also has a deeply personal connection to the history of the library. He was, with Hal Francis, one of the key instigators of the Coalfield History Project, which was established way back in 1971. And through that critical project, Di and Hal Francis, with the active support, of course, of the South Wales area of the National Union of Mine Workers, paved the way for the development of the library that we love today. Without them and their efforts, we simply would not be here this evening. So I'm therefore honoured to welcome Di Smith to the stage. Welcome to you, Di.
Thank you very much, Vice Chancellor. It's a bit difficult, you know. I mean, 50 years ago, as Sean said today, I was there. And I've been looking at the photographs, and it's a bit frightening, really. Where's that young man gone? And I keep looking in the mirror, and then I think better things, well, they just don't make mirrors like they used to. The South Wales Miners' Library was a dream, but it was also a sort of a salvage operation, as Howell and I went initially around the coalfield trying to rescue the Institute libraries. And there are so many byways to this story, and I'll just say one of them, which is that we met with lots of people, and one, I think it was in Abertrydydd, we met a librarian or an ex-librarian, who told us about the way in which in the 1930s, Winford Vaughan Thomas, working for some charitable organisation, had turned up and given the princely sum of £500 to the pretty desperate conditions of the Institute Library. And he said he'd come back in a couple of months' time to see what they'd done with it, the books they'd bought with it. And he came back and there were no books. But there were radios, and they'd bought radios, and they overlooked a Greyhound track in Abertrydydd, and they looked out, and Winford said, "And what do you do with the rest of the money?" He said, "It's on number 4 there." You see, the thing about the miners' libraries is that they were a creative product of the material circumstances of coal. I'm often reminded of Eric Hobsbawm saying, you know, that in the end, history does count. Rome did beat Carthage in the Punic Wars, not the other way round. And we can only mythologize and theorize so far. History counts. And in Welsh terms, coal counts. There is no modern Wales without what happened in coal. And there is no future Wales without our understanding of what it means for that society to have been created around those material circumstances, and iron and steel and so on. And that is the thing that worries me, I suppose, and which encourages me at the same time when I contemplate what Swansea University has done to actually allow that memory to continue. And it was one of the reasons it was such a delight for me when I became chair of the Rhys Davies Trust, which I'll say a few words, for over 20 years, that we were able to use the over £500,000 we had, to use the legacy left by Lewis Davies in honour of his brother Rhys, to affirm the expression in English, our Welsh lingua franca, for over a century now, to affirm the articulation of modern society and culture in Wales. We were the largest private literary charity in the UK. We awarded bursaries, we put up plaques, we created prizes, we commissioned works of literary criticism and biography and fiction. We kept the faith. And all in the name of the incomparable short story writer and novelist who was born in the Rhondda, his turbulent valley, as he called it, in 1902. And out of that social chaos of that world came such a great gift, I think. It was creativity from him and others. And the number of people, the musicians, I was going to say the boxers, the actors, the Houstons, the Richard Burtons, the Lewis Joneses, who came out of that kind of society, and to bear witness to what it is that they had gone through. Now, that world, let's not be sentimental, that world of coal, as I'm sure we'll hear partly later in the second Rhys Davies lecture at the South Wales Miners' Library, that world of coal has ceased. But because it has ceased, the consciousness of its meaning for Wales increases, not diminishes. Or else we stumble and lack understanding. We become mere sheep, not sentient beings. Consciousness is of who we were and who we need to be. And that, I think, is the greatest thing my oldest and greatest friend, Howell Francis, brought to us during his lifetime. He lived it, he saw it, he was rooted in it, and he refused to let it go. And it's why the trust, the Rhys Davies Trust, then reached out 2 years ago to create partnerships to take over the work, to take our work forward. And no partnership has been more vital or more fruitful than that with Swansea University, under the leadership of Dr. Elaine Canning, who came to us with a brilliant plan which we were able to support. And through Elaine, we have funded at around £100,000 the many community and educational initiatives undertaken by the marvellous Dull & Ed programmes, an offshoot itself of the amazing Dull & Thomas Prize, which I've been privileged to chair. What other university in Wales has those credits in its bank? None, just Swansea. And then we were able to go forward to take, under Elaine's leadership from the Cultural Institute at Swansea, the Rhys Davies Short Story Competition. Third edition has just been published. We were able to actually work with them through our funding on the Children's Literature Festival, and they've recently attracted over a weekend about 3,000 attendees. If we talk about material deprivation, if we talk about a lack of understanding or creativity, we begin with our children, and we begin, I think, by showing them how to daydream, to think back not just of their societies, but of the things that they can create. It's an amazing achievement. And again, it's Swansea University. And at the resilient, and as I say, remarkable South Wales Miners' Library, there is no other library like it. It's an old joke, but it was true, that on this day, 50 years ago, at the end of a day of celebration and some drinking, Howell was cornered by a reporter who asked him to sum up what the South Wales Miners' Library was. And he took a deep breath and he said, well, it's the biggest South Wales Miners' Library in the world. Or the other way of putting it, and the way Howell also meant, was the world needed something as big as that. Wales was global. Wales was reaching out. Wales was showing ways forward. And our ancestors had, from nothing really, created bricks out of straw. Sian Williams has taken the library forward, and I'm delighted to hear the Vice-Chancellor say how supportive Swansea University will continue to be of this unique achievement. And we, the Trust, the Rhys Davies Trust, were able to give monies for a research fellowship for a Swansea PhD graduate, Dr. Darrell Leeworthy, another £100,000 over 3 years. And the result of that already has been 5 books including a wonderful, magnificent biography of the writer and other Rhys Davies figurehead, Gwyn Thomas. If you haven't read that book, you really should. So I just want to say, Paul, Swansea is at the heart of all this and has been, as Glamour Williams was arguing 50 years ago, and it's the way in which Swansea University has understood the importance of creativity through humanities and through the arts that allows you to have, in this dynamic university of which you can be so proud, a heart and a soul, as well as a statistic. So long may you continue.
Diolch yn fawr, Dai. I'm shortly going to introduce the person you really want to hear from, not me, but our speaker for this evening. But before I do, I'd like to just offer my sincere thanks on behalf of the university and our wider community to Sian Williams, who's been critical. Sian has been critical to the development of this library, and I think she already mentioned, since she joined as librarian in 1995, some time ago. Sian, you've continued Howe's legacy as a tireless and passionate advocate for both the library and its unique collections. And we're delighted that you'll be instrumental in helping us to think about the future of this library. We thank you all for all that you've done, and of course, for organising tonight's event. Thank you very much. Now, it gives me great pleasure to introduce this year's guest speaker, J. Willgoose Esquire. Jay is founder and principal songwriter of Public Service Broadcasting, a band with whom many of you will be very familiar. PSB are renowned for their imaginative retelling of stories from our collective past, and their use of archival material, and of course, importantly, their use of archival material from the Miners' Library, is a unique element in the work that they do. We were delighted, of course, back in 2017, when Jay worked closely with the South Wales Miners' Library during the development of the album Every Valley. If you haven't listened, please do go and listen. A release which utilised our collections along with other materials to chart the highs and lows of the coal mining community. As we think about the library's past and how we can best ensure that we bring its collections to life for future generations, I cannot think of a better and more appropriate speaker for the 50th anniversary lecture. Jay, thank you very much indeed for giving up your time to be with us here this evening and for your support of the library. I'm delighted to welcome to the stage J. Willgoose Esquire.
Good evening, hello. I'd just like to offer my congratulations as well to the Miners' Library on the 50th anniversary. That's an incredible achievement and a venerable and extremely useful institution. And also, of course, my sympathies and condolences to both Julie and Dr. Francis, both of whom I met and who were kind enough to lend their support to what we were trying to do in admittedly slightly different ways, I suppose. But it's very touching that this evening is dedicated to them, and I hope I can speak with some kind of degree of eloquence and lucidity to match the importance of that dedication. Yes, it's a fantastic honour to have been asked to come back to Swansea to give this talk. It really is one of the furthest things from my kind of hopes and dreams, I suppose, for making this record. You know, I started out making this record in early 2016, and I think if you could have told me then how things would pan out, both in terms of the working relationships with the archives that we dealt with, and also with the musicians and the communities that we dealt with, and the relationships that we managed to build in Ebbw Vale and elsewhere, I think it would have been beyond my wildest dreams to be given the honour of coming back here for such a fantastic occasion. So my thanks for asking me here. I think I've been somewhat overbilled personally, but yeah, I'm going to do my best to kind of live up to the billing, I suppose. Now, I'm not going to assume that everybody here knows who we are or what we do or who I am or how we do. So I thought what might be most useful is almost a kind of case study of, how we came to be as a band, how we came to operate the way we do, why we do that, and why we reached the point where we wanted to make what was for us then quite a different record, which would rely on different kinds of materials being gathered in different ways, and even to some extent gathered by us, going out and doing interviews and recording with people. And in so doing, hopefully, inspire others of you who work in academia, who work in libraries, who work in ways that can kind of facilitate those kind of collaborations and make these archives, visible to parts of the public who might not otherwise engage with them, and hopefully give some kind of level of understanding of how it all came to pass, really. So the record we are going to talk about is this one from 2017. It's called Every Valley, named after a public transport film, actually, from the 1940s. It's also a line from Handel's Requiem, which makes me sound very knowledgeable and musical, but no, it was named after a film about buses. This was an unusual record for us, as I say, and I think to have gone from where I started, this kind of started as a one-man thing in my bedroom in a flat in Tooting, to have gone from how I kind of started playing around with this material to a record like this is quite a remarkable journey, and I don't say that to blow my own trumpet. I just mean in terms of the possibilities of imagination and creativity, and also support from archive institutions, and how those forward-thinking archive institutions, which is not, sadly, all of them, and those who are kind of able to commercially support, burgeoning, nascent kind of, almost like kind of startup bands, I suppose, like us, with kind of accommodating rates and accommodating kind of arrangements, the benefits that you could see as a result of that. So public service broadcasting started back it was kind of in 2008 informally. I was making instrumental music on my own. I'd been in various kind of half-rate bands for many years, all of which had kind of dissolved in failure, and I'd given up on becoming a musician of any kind whatsoever, and just decided to do something for fun. So my idea of fun was making instrumental, mostly electronic music, and then I heard, appropriately enough, an Archive Hour programme on Radio 4 talking about the BFI, the British Film Institute, and their release of some materials online, and encouraging people to go on and look for them. So I was kind of looking for a way to give the music that I was making some personality, because it's hard with instrumental music to kind of get, to kind of give it a hook that people can kind of latch onto, I suppose. And I thought this might be a way of doing it. So the first film that I kind of set eyes on and ended up using was this from the BFI archive.
Now, I'm going to show you 3 things, and you've got to tell me what you do. Number 1, a pint of... Well, you seem to know what to do with that, all right. Number 2, a handkerchief. Excellent. Remember, coughs and sneezes spread diseases. Now, number 3, a bowl of disinfectant. Hey, you don't drink it, man. That's for the soiled handkerchief, which is full of germs. You put the handkerchief into the disinfectant, which kills the germs and so stops the spread of infection. Now, let's get this quite clear. You sneeze into the handkerchief and then put the handkerchief into a bowl of disinfectant to kill the germs. Not in with the family's washing. Got it? Sure? Good. Remember, don't spread germs.
So yeah, that's the film, Don't Spread Germs, a sequel to Coughs and Sneezes Spread Diseases. I kind of think they should have been given another run out a couple of years ago, actually. But sadly, they were underutilised. Should have a word with Professor Valence, maybe. And from that film, I ended up making this kind of rather sort of whimsical, I'll play a short bit of the very first PSP demo that was, which is called 3 Things.
Now, I'm going to show you 3 things, and you've got to tell me what you do with them. Number 1... Number 2. Now, number 3.
about it was almost window dressing, I suppose. It was kind of using quite kitsch samples in a way to add a bit of personality to music that was otherwise slightly lacking, and being quite playful with them in the process. Sort of chopping up a film about 3 very different other things and using it to kind of express musical ideas instead. So that led to me kind of starting to do gigs. This is me in my then local pub, the Selkirk in Tooting. This was the very first PSB gig, so it was just me and some wires, and yeah, hasn't really. I think this is the same computer actually. Yeah, and a bit of guitar, a bit of banjo. There was no visual element whatsoever. The visual element came from me using that. You can just about make out there a theremin. I kind of wafted my hand around that to try and get people interested. But bizarrely enough, and it still does surprise me, it did generate positive response, more than any other musical thing that I'd done in the past. So I kind of picked it up and ran with it, really. This is me taking the show to the Fringe in Edinburgh in 2010, by which point I had edited videos to run concurrently with the songs that I was playing, which was a great help because I'm quite devoid of I'd say quite devoid of charisma, full stop, but especially performing charisma. I'm not naturally the most kind of free and expressive person on stage, so it was great to just plonk a TV at the front of the stage and say, don't watch me, watch that. And it worked, it was very effective. This is me putting myself in the literal shop window. This is trendy Curtain Road in Shoreditch. This is the vintage dress shop I was gigging in. Ended up being approached by the person who owned this shop, who was a music manager, as it turned out, and thought that maybe we could kind of have a bit of a, 1 or 2 interesting summers on the festival circuit, playing this kind of novelty gigs and, being vaguely kitsch in the way that we were, I suppose. So this is all quite unlikely beginnings for a musical project anyway, but I think especially unlikely beginnings for ending up here talking to you today at such a kind of prestigious event as this about a record that we made that is an entirely different proposition, I think. I think a big step for me was it got to the stage where I just used all these clips without permission because who cared? I was nobody, nobody was going to buy my music, nobody was going to listen to it particularly, so I just kind of got on with it. And we started to get played on the radio, so I thought, I'd probably better phone somebody actually and try and get permission. So I phoned the BFI and spoke to a lovely lady there who was very confused, but receptive and confused, which is a good blend for an archive institution. There's plenty more who just send you the commercial rates card, and that's the end of the conversation, sadly. And she asked me to send her a demonstration of my work, and I sent her one about driving safety, which is called Signal 30. And I think by the sounds of things, they gathered around in the office and watched it, her and her boss and a couple of others, and gave it a thumbs up, remarkably. And that led to us being able to use the BFI's archive in our work kind of under a relatively unofficial arrangement to start with, which was then solidified as we start to find some kind of unpredicted success, I suppose. And a big sort of step change in the way that we worked was I started to think, is this just a novelty thing, or is there more that you can do with archive than just kind of sprinkling these, almost like, window dressing type things on a song? Is there more that you can do with it? Could you, for example, write a record all about one subject and kind of start to weave a bit of a narrative through that music, thereby making it more emotional, giving the listener something to invest in, giving it some kind of more gravitas, and making it seem like a more serious proposition. It was very fun in the early days, kind of mucking about for fun, but, like all kind of big-headed musicians, eventually you want to be taken seriously, I suppose. This is the early steps of that for me. And the big step forward for us was The War Room, which was released in 2012, and we used BFI archive all across that, and including the feature film, The First of the Few, which was suggested to us by them actually for usage. So this is a song that we made from that called Spitfire.
It's tiring, always stretching up for something that's just out of reach, but I'll get it. After all, what I want isn't as easy as all that. Got to do 400 miles an hour, turn on a sixpence, climb 10,000 feet in a few minutes, dive at 500 without the wings coming off, carry 8 machine guns.
Hello, Hunter Leader. Bandits approaching Beachy from southeast, Angels 1-5, over. Bandits are now about 3 to 4 miles south of Beachy. We should see them in a minute, they're down south of you. Hello, Hunter Leader, flammer control calling, can you see them? Can you see them?
So yeah, that kind of put us on the map a little bit, and people found it so much easier to kind of get their, attach their emotions to something like a song about a Spitfire, because they obviously bring all their passions and all their interests in life to whatever they listen to. But when you give them something like that, which has kind of a much more open and sort of interesting and attractive framework rather than just being kind of quite shallow and frothy, you find that people start to take it more seriously, and they start to recognize that actually there maybe is more depth to this than a lot of people, myself included, in the early days would attach to it. So yeah, we kind of picked that up and ran with it, really. We released our first record the year after that and toured a lot. We played 156 shows in 2013 alone, which I still can't quite believe we survived. And then we released very swiftly after that first record, we released The Race for Space, which was a kind of very narrative-driven record in 2015, using, again, BFI footage for the Soviet side of the space race and NASA audio collection stuff for the American side of it. And from very kind of, extremely humble beginnings, I was more surprised than anybody to find us on stage at Brixton Academy, and as a South London, as someone who grew up in South London, went to that venue a lot to see incredible bands like the Manic Street Preachers, who we'll talk about in a bit. To kind of find yourself on that stage performing these songs it was so far beyond any kind of hopes or dreams I had for PSB in terms of what it could do. It really, it was, well, hopefully I'll show you the video and you can hopefully identify with how alien and exciting I found it. Like a lot of dreams, you kind of, if you're lucky enough to achieve it, I remember getting to the end of that concert and playing, I think it was the penultimate song, and thinking, well, what now? Is that it? Where do we go from here? This is so far beyond what I thought we could do. I've been listening to the new Wilco record this week, which is co-produced actually by one of Wales's finest, Kate Le Bon. I highly recommend it if you're looking for some new music. And there's a line on one of the songs there, which is, "I've outlived my dreams." And I thought, yeah, I know how that feels. And I was at that point in 2015, at the tail end of 2015, trying to work out what to do next with the band. That record, The Race for Space, has subsequently gone on to become gold certified in the UK, which means 100,000 copies. I don't mention that to boast, I just mention that because it was self-released on our own label, entirely self-produced. We secured a bit of funding for it, but otherwise it was an entirely kind of homebrew thing. I like to see it as kind of the equivalent of a non-league team winning the FA Cup or something. It shouldn't happen. That shouldn't happen. It's marvellous that it did, and I think it's testament to kind of the health of the alternative music scene in the UK, despite many people's best efforts to curtail those. So yeah, it just, I didn't know where to go with the project from there. Do you kind of chase ever larger crowds? Do you try and go to arena level? Do you repeat the thing that was successful in the hope that you found something that people like, you should just carry on doing it forever and make people happy? Or do you try and take a more interesting kind of imaginative and creative leap and continue to kind of test the concept of the band and, this institution of our own that we were building and see how far you can go with it? You've just made a record all about superhuman achievements, extraterrestrial activity, that's kind of universal. Can you make, something much more specific and local to a particular community? Can you make something about, for all the best will in the world, a less glamorous subject? Something that's not likely to kind of get 5-year-old, 7-year-old kids excited about it as readily. So for me, I started to kind of gravitate towards the idea of working with industrial material or industrial history material. And that led to, early searches. This is the BFI Advanced Search, which anybody can access on their website just to see what kind of materials that they hold. And this is just a generic search for mining, but there's 463 results for that alone. And I was aware that they had the National Coal Board footage and that we would be able to license that through our existing relationship with them. So there was an element of kind of pragmatism to the road that we ended up going down too, which there has to be when you're relying on kind of the goodwill and the provision of material from other people for your records. So having kind of decided that industrial history would be an interesting challenge, you know, sort of from a songwriting perspective and also from a kind of personal perspective. I started to read kind of more widely about the history of coal mining in particular in this country, and just found myself more and more drawn to a particular community, being the community in South Wales, how strong it was during the strike of the 80s, how kind of united and how much solidarity there was here, I suppose, in comparison to some other parts of the country. And I started to wonder if you could kind of zoom in, if you could really put one particular region under the microscope and tell that region's story, you know, in relative detail compared to the kind of very broad stroke stuff that we've done, would that perhaps invite people to make their own comparisons with their own industry? You know, when we were playing Every Valley up in Newcastle, for example, or Sunderland, or, you know, they've had a similar kind of industrial decline to the rest of the country in the 80s and 90s, and it's not much of an extrapolation for them to kind of hopefully take something so geolocated and so specific to one community and kind of, by shining a light so brightly on one part, do you kind of explain the wider part more effectively than doing something so kind of broad strokes, I suppose. So I started to kind of mentally zoom in on South Wales as an idea, and the BFI were kind enough to provide me with this list of NCB films, which was very handily catalogued by county and region divisions, so I could narrow it down to what was on offer from South Wales or from Wales more widely, and start to think about, is there a story that you could tell, you know, using the archive? How could you kind of tell the story of the days when mining was a prestigious and you know, key to the community industry, to the mid-80s and the sort of the early 90s when it had become a political punching bag, and the communities that had thrived off the back of it had been so kind of remorselessly and cynically torn to shreds, really. You know, was there a way of kind of weaving your way through that using archive material? Or if not archive material, maybe you could think laterally. Maybe there were other materials that you could use. And that was a challenge because, you know, previously I'd worked a lot further in the past. The 80s and 90s was much more recent than sort of 72 was the last event on the Race for Space. It's a bit of a jump. It's much more into kind of everyday political consciousness, I suppose, everyday memory, a lot more raw. And obviously, not something that I have particular experience of either. I was extremely aware of that. I still am aware of that coming here today, you know, as somebody with rampant imposter syndrome. To stand here today giving a 50th anniversary talk on the South Wales Miners Library feels well, inappropriate to me, but it's very nice to have been asked, I suppose. But you know, how do I not just be a kind of vampiric, you know, London kind of media type person just descending on this story, adapting it for my own needs, and sort of, you know, taking it back to London and not forging any kind of bonds with the community, not asking for permission in a way. How could I go about kind of forging some bonds in the community and meeting some people and asking their blessing, I suppose, in a way, and asking their permission to tell this story? So the way I start most records is just with reading, you know, as much as it is about checking whether archive materials exist, it's about reading. One book that I found that was particularly useful was kind of self-published, I think. It's kind of oral history. It was interviews by the authors, Deborah Price and Natalie Butts-Thompson. It's called How Black Were Our Valleys, and it featured testimony, I think, from, you know, I think Ron Stoats in there. I think there are many people they put me in touch with subsequently who are kind of, you know, big figures from the South Wales mining coalfield history. So I got in touch with Deborah and said, you know, I've read your book. It was you know, exactly the sort of material that I'm after. And I asked her for a couple of things, really. First of all was, you know, would it be possible to introduce me to some of these people? I'd like to talk to myself. I'd like to do some of our own interviews. I'd like to kind of meet people in the community and see if there's a kind of a resistance to what I'd like to do. And second of all, what do you think? You know, do you think we should be doing this? Is this something that's our right to tell? And she was incredibly generous. She just gave me nothing but encouragement for it, said just go for it. I think she'd had a similar kind of experience writing this book and worrying about, you know, whether or not being directly descended from coal mine workers, she had a right to tell that story, but she was given that encouragement and she was very kind in passing that on to me. And I think as long as you kind of approach the subject matter that you're approaching, when it is a sensitive one like this, if you approach it from the outside, I think if you do it with a degree of sensitivity, if you do it with a degree of generosity of spirit, if you do it with the kind of the right intentions and the right kind of open-heartedness, I suppose, hopefully you'll be rewarded for that in terms of people recognizing you for being genuinely interested in this and not kind of just using it for your own selfish ends. And I was very pleased that Deborah was the first in a very, very long chain of people who were so welcoming and supportive of our efforts. So I stepped up my research off the back of that. I started contacting people and I started delving into the BFI archive. I knew roughly by that point the story that I wanted to tell. I wanted to start when mining was, as Richard Burton says on the record, when they were the kings of the coalfield, when miners used to be able to kind of look down on the doctors' daughters and the teachers' daughters because they were kind of, they were this kind of prestigious, kind of lordly class in a way. I wanted to tell that story from where that started and the kind of the reinforcement of mining as a noble industry, as the backbone of Britain, as something that supported the war effort enormously. There's a line in The Pit, which is the second song on the record, saying, "The people of Britain are building, hewing out from our native rock, the foundations of the future." And of course they were, and they had been for hundreds of years before that. But how do you go from that point to what happened further down the line, where these people who you've been lionising as kind of the real spirit of the country, who are kind of providing the foundations for everything that we relied on and all of our kind of industrial advancement, how do you go from that to them becoming the enemy who are to be defeated at all costs, including great costs to themselves, of course? So I started going into the archive. Many of you will be familiar with this, I'm sure, but this is People Will Always Need Coal from 1975, which is a BFI licensed material again.
If you know what a coal mine looks like, get a job in Britain's modern mining industry and get more out of life.
Hey, there, miner, living life the way you want it to be. Come on now, miner, there's money, lots of money and security.
Be a miner. Ask at your local pit or job centre in South Wales.
Yeah, that's 1975. And other lines that we used in our version of that song, People Always Need Coal, included that that South Wales coalfield will be turning out coal for 400 years. And that was from a similar era film. So how do you get from that point to, to what came later? I'll just briefly play you our version of that, which took that opening jingle and then kind of went off the back of that into something else.
In South Wales, it seems over 2.5 feet thick. There is still at least 10,000 million tons of the coal that made her famous. Enough for another 400 years.
So there you have it. And I think I was quite comfortable with the first half of the record because I knew I wanted to set mining up using this kind of archive material as that kind of, sort of lofty and lauded profession, dangerous. I wanted to make sure that was highlighted. But, a bright future. I knew I could tell that story with the archive material that the BFI had. I knew that was possible. What I didn't know how to do was the second half of the record and getting onto much more contemporary sources. I didn't know where to find those sources. I didn't know how to get permission to use them. I wanted to make sure we used voices from the area and wanted to use kind of genuine oral history from South Wales, if I could, to tell that story. So how to go about, finding that, essentially. And from speaking to Deborah and speaking to some other folks, she kindly introduced me to Kerry down at Big Pit and took me there, and I met him and, had a kind of bit of a mini tour there. And Deborah and I went down into, did the kind of tour underground, which convinced me more than anything that mining would not have been a strong point for me personally. And she was kind enough to introduce me to Ron Stote, who mentioned Wayne Thomas earlier, but Ron's another kind of NUM South Wales stalwart. He pops up in a lot of documentaries about it. He's a great talker. He was very generous with his time and his support for this as well. He was never very keen on the fact I wore a bow tie, though, on stage, and quite frequently took me to task over that. So I'm not wearing one in his honour tonight. And I ended up, I interviewed some of these people. I interviewed Ron, I interviewed Wayne down in the NUM headquarters here, and some of Ron's interview actually made it onto the record. But in the process of those interviews, which for me were a very useful experience in terms of meeting people and kind of understanding, the perspective here, and kind of ridding myself of some of the preconceptions I had about certain aspects of the strike in particular, I kind of discovered this problem of tense, really, which is that interviewing people today about what happened in the 80s, you swiftly move into the past tense, and it just has a way of feeling like it was a very long time ago. And when you're looking to kind of tell a story that has impact and immediacy and drama, that kind of shift between tenses, it started to feel like a bit of a problem for me. So I continued to kind of spread the net wide in the hope of turning up some, useful material. I went up to the National Coal Mining Museum for England up in Wakefield, which has its own library there, and that's, ironically enough, in Wakefield is where I discovered the Rhys Davies poem, Gwalior Deserter, which we ended up adapting with James Dean Bradfield of the Manics for our song Turn No More. That's where I discovered that poem. And I continued reading more widely around the subject. I came to Dr. Ben Curtis's book, The South Wales Miners, 1964-1985. This is one of the most useful things that I read across the entire period. I did promise Ben I'd give him a plug for his book. Not that he asked for one, but it is a fantastic book. And I think it really helped give me a grounding, especially of the kind of the political, the kind of politically radical, I suppose, in the broader context of the UK element of the South Wales coalfield, which Dr. Francis was actually quite keen to impress upon me when we met as well. He wanted to make sure I understood that. And this book went a long way to helping with that. But one of the main things that came out of it was reading it. I realised that he was making reference to interviews that he had recorded. So the kind of the testimonial and the testament of these miners that were, giving such character and authenticity to this book, maybe they still exist somewhere. Maybe I could get in touch with Ben and ask him, could I listen to it? Could I use it? So as I kind of do, I just found his details and got in touch with him. And he told me he didn't have the tapes anymore. He'd given them to the South Wales Miners Library, which is how I came to kind of descend upon that venerable institution, how I came to meet Sian and the others down there. And I basically went down there for, I think it was about a week and a half of purely listening to audio cassettes, and swiftly realised that I wasn't going to get through them in time, so I bought this, hang on, that's the wrong order. I bought this, which is a kind of, it's a transcribing machine. Normally, if I'm listening to kind of digital clips, to help me get through them more quickly, you can just kind of speed them up digitally. But this is a very analog way of doing it. It does have a little kind of, that's wrong again. Sorry, these seem to have got out of order on there. They're on order here. Okay. Right. Apologies for this. There you go. I have no idea why it wasn't there before, but there it is. Speed control. So I found myself in the South Wales Miners Library listening to quite strong regional accents, shall we say. And I like to think I've got a reasonable ear for these things, but I swiftly learned that 1.5 speed listening to very heavy Welsh accents was not something that was going to help me discern what was going on so much. But I still use this, enabling me to speed things up a bit and get through a lot of material. I listened to a lot of Ben's tapes, and I asked Sian and the team at the library, was there any other kind of oral history that I could maybe listen to from the time? And they gave me, a whole kind of box full of stuff to go through, some of which included interviews with Margaret Donovan and also Christine Powell, who I can see here today. And people often ask me, how do you know what clips to use when you're looking through archive? Like, how do you choose them? And I don't kind of want to give a fatuous answer, but it's just obvious. Even when you're listening at sort of a speed and a half, speed and a third, or whatever, there's a change in the rhythm of people's voices almost when they're going to say something that means something deeply to them and that comes from the heart, and it's going to kind of elucidate a wider truth, I suppose. And I think everyone would be able to pick that up if you were to listen to a tape. You'd be able to kind of say, that's the bit, that's the bit. And this is what I heard at the South Wales Miners Library going through those tapes.
I don't know, I suppose it goes back really to the fact that out of a pile of grandchildren, I'm the only girl, you know. He was like, you can't climb up the street, you're a girl. Or, you can't come with us because you're a girl. And it made me damn determined to do it. And I suppose it sort of stuck with me. So I didn't see any reason why I shouldn't be out there doing what I was doing, why I shouldn't go picketing, why I shouldn't be in the support group or whatever. But I could see later on that there's a lot of women who weren't as fortunate as me. They were sort of brought up in a more traditional style, shall we say. They weren't taught to wire a plug, they were taught to make a sponge. They weren't taught how to change the wheel on the car. They were taught the proper way to iron a white shirt, sort of thing.
I mean, it's just obvious to me. I mean, Christine's in the front row here kind of flinching, hearing her own voice, which is an experience that we all have, I'm sure. But it's just, there's a great deal of profundity in there, I think. There's a great deal of power. And when you hear that, it's just obvious. So I kind of, having found a few of these clips, you know, across my research there, I spoke to Sian about the possibility of kind of, you know, procuring some kind of license for them. I was aware that it might not be something that they'd done particularly a great deal in the past. They might not kind of have as formal a framework as even a relatively informal institution like the BFI might have. I was aware that it was quite a big ask and it was quite an imposition. And I think it's really testament to kind of her and her approach to running the South Wales Miners Library, not only the support that I had during the research, but the support that I had in kind of following that research through and being able to use those materials and kind of bring this audio sat on a cassette, you know, in a box in the South Wales Miners Library, which I'm sure is being listened to regularly, but maybe bring it to people who aren't going to be in the South Wales Miners Library listening to it, you know, how to reach a wider audience. And I think it was a similar kind of generosity of spirit that I hoped to kind of bring to my efforts to tell this story that I found at the South Wales Miners Library with Sian and the team. She was great in kind of in terms of almost vouching for us, I suppose, vouching for me and what I was going to try and do with it, and kind of doing a lot of the behind the scenes work to ask people would they be willing to let their voices be used on our music. And thankfully we got permission for that clip. And it ended up in our song They Gave Me a Lamp, which I'd been scouring the archives particularly with a view to women's voices and wanting to make sure women's support groups were represented on the record, being such a vital part of you know, that industrial dispute in the 80s, and how it was a catalyst politically for a lot of women especially, you know, to become politically active and to become engaged in a way that they hadn't previously been. So it was fantastic to find that clip and to be given permission to use it in this way.
A lot of women who weren't as fortunate as me. They weren't taught to wire a plug, they were taught to make a sponge. They weren't taught how to change the wheel on the car. They were taught the proper way to iron a white shirt. You can't climb up the street, you're a girl. You can't come with us because you're a girl. And it made me damn determined to do it, and I suppose it sort of stuck with me. So I didn't see any reason why I shouldn't be out there doing what I was doing, why I shouldn't go picketing, why I shouldn't be in the support group. I think a lot of women found their feet.
So, you know, it ended up forming kind of the backbone of that track and kind of a moral compass for that song and the record in a way. And it solved the problem that I had of relying on historical BFI archive up to a certain point and needing to find kind of other sources of oral history, other repositories for that kind of testimony that would be possible to use in the way that I wanted to use them. In for a penny, in for a pound. I'm going to play the other clip of Christine that we used, sorry. But this is from Mother of the Village. This is kind of towards the end of the record when we're talking about, you know, how these industries defined the existence of these communities, and how when you ripped that out of the community, you know, there was just this kind of void there. I was extremely struck going to Aberfale for the first time and looking, you know, being on the I think it's called the High Street or the Main Street, and sort of thinking, why is this up on the hillside? Why is that incredibly, you know, promising looking sort of floodplain, well, flat land down there? Why is that not built on? What's going on there? Being an idiot. And then, of course, it's shown around the Vale Institute, and you see the steelworks that used to be the very heart, the beating heart of that community. And when you go there, I think you can sense that kind of loss in a community like that when it's been ripped away, and when, you know, they've tried their best to replace it, I suppose, with other community assets. But the very kind of foundation and kind of development of that place is reliant on that industry. And when it's ripped away so unceremoniously and with nothing offered in return, no kind of retraining, no kind of other vocational skills or qualifications, just communities left to flounder. It was something I really wanted to make sure I addressed on the record, and thankfully, Christine eloquently addressed that as well.
I remember all the shops that used to be in the village. The pubs would be full on payday. You know, you get to realise what you mean by the death of a village, and about the pit being the mother of the village, and all these phrases that sound all very romantic, but they're not romantic at all, they're true.
I find it very moving watching that footage. And obviously, I'm not from here. I don't have any particular ties to the area, so I can only imagine what it means to anyone who grew up in the valleys and was kind of used to those familiar scenes, and then saw the kind of the strife and destruction that followed in the 80s and 90s at the hands of a fairly ruthless mob. Just to sort of tie things off in terms of how we approach the record, I'm aware that my lateness, thanks to the M4, means we've run slightly over. But it was important to me as well that we kind of try to embed ourselves in the community in terms of how we recorded the album. I'd done the previous record mostly in my garage in southeast London, which I think is fine when you're writing about the space race, because it's a subject so huge and so kind of dislocated that it, it belongs to all of us, and it's everywhere and nowhere all at the same time. I think for the kind of record I wanted to make here, rooted in a community and reliant on the goodwill of that community, it felt right to find a suitable space within that community to come and record. And my wife was not working at the time. She was quite ill, so I kind of tried to find her things to do to distract her. And I gave her the task of, like, find us somewhere, with a nice size hall or something, try and find us somewhere in the valleys where we can record an album, take over a room for a month. And she found us a studio in Ebbw Vale, Leaders Vale, which we thought was an auspicious sign because we also had a King Charles Cavalier, which is their logo. That's Kenny Dalglish, by the way, their dog. He was a character. So their main studio was kind of just down the hall from here, but as soon as I saw this picture of the main kind of institute lecture space, my eyes just lit up. It's basically the same size and dimension as Abbey Road 2, and the idea of kind of being able to set up camp there for a month and have some actual resonance, some physical resonance. When you record a sound in a room, unless you're recording extremely close up and baffling everything off and trying to isolate that sound so no kind of acoustic spill gets into it, you are kind of picking up the echoes of the institution, echoes of the room, the kind of the air and the atmosphere at the time that you're recording in. So to be able to go to a room like this was a really vital part of it. And we made a short film about it in 2017, just to give you an idea of how we kind of adapted the room to our purposes and a bit of a behind-the-scenes glimpse, I suppose, of the making of the record. Keep it coming, keep it coming. Oh, it's just starting to hurt my neck.
Just watch the screens. Professional recording studio.
Sound's gone out of sync for some reason. That's a good kick. I don't think many people get a chance to make an album like this anymore. It's the first time we've had the luxury of actually
spending a prolonged period of time in a studio, like on location almost, as it were. Even, you know, wanting to do an album that way is a kind of ambition these days, really. There's not too many bands who can do it, so very lucky there.
How's that? Dusty, come here. Talking to my
Stop
dog
it. Sit. Stay. Stay. Wait, stay.
She was quite a young puppy at that point, and people had left a lot of scraps in that room for her to sort of root out, so she had quite a field day. Not the best kind of preparation for trying to really get your head in the space musically and record, you know, the perfect take when your dog is misbehaving. So she's still the same today. Yeah, that's kind of a broad view of us as a band, us as our history, our potted history of the band, and how we came to make the record that we made with Every Valley, and the incredible kind of support from institutions like the South Wales Miners Library that we relied on in doing so. You know, and hopefully made something that resonates with people. I know, you know, we are lucky enough to have people coming up to us saying that this record means a great deal to them. I think really we're just, of all the bands out there, we really are the ones kind of standing on the shoulders of giants. You know, our work couldn't really exist without all the kind of other work that we're relying upon. So I'd just like to close by saying another enormous thanks to Sean and everyone at the South Wales Miners Library, everybody here for coming. Thank you for staying a bit later than intended. And yeah, thanks for listening to the record if you have. And if you are of an academic persuasion, please do be open to these kind of collaborations, because unexpected and hopefully wonderful things can come as a result. If we have time, I don't know if there were to be any questions, there's a possibility we could maybe ask them, but I don't know. A couple of minutes, but I'm not going to be offended if there aren't any, so don't worry.
Does anybody have a question? We've probably got time for one or two questions. Yes, there's a mic coming your way, Steve.
Oh, look at that.
Thank you very much.
Hello.
Thank you, Jay, for a fascinating run through the music. Thank you for the respect that you pay to the communities as well. I think it's really important, and that it's very authentic the way that you talk about the music and talk about the community, and it's quite moving in many ways. I just wondered whether there's some interplay between the type of music that you end up creating and the archives that you read. How does the music come after? Does the music come first? What drives that side of it?
Thank you. That's extremely kind, and it's also extremely heartening to know that, you know, having gone into it with that approach, it does come across to some people. Thank you very much. In terms of the archive and the approach to it, this record was it was written about 50-50 with the first half of the record having the clips and knowing what they were going to be roughly, and the second half was written more or less blind, really, and seeking out the clips to fill in the gaps to kind of tell the parts of the narrative that I needed to. So finding that clip of Christine, for example, you know, I had a demo of that track, but it didn't have a long enough section in the middle for that to fit into. So I just, you know, had to do some rejigging and kind of move stuff around. But I still wanted that track about women's support groups to be kind of fragile at first, but becoming rousing and powerful and kind of ebullient and strong by the end. And you kind of have a musical framework for these ideas in your head, even if you do have the archive, or even if you know you might have the archive at some point. You're kind of holding two ideas kind of, you know, simultaneously, I suppose, and kind of seeing how they interact in your head and also in the real world. But yeah, kind of 50-50, one way or the other.
Are there any other questions?
Yes, thank you very much for that. A great vision, really, of what can be achieved over quite a long period of time working with archives in the care of universities. I was wondering what has been possible to be done, given that we've got a new national curriculum based very much on a sense of place in Wales coming in now. What work you've managed to do with schools either in Swansea Valleys or schools around Ebbw Vale. I have very fond memories myself of working for 6 years in Bryn Mawr, so the more that you can reach out back into communities and schools, absolutely hugely important for how we take this forward.
Do you mean with the record that we made and kind of...
Out of the record that you've made, with the creative partnerships that you've established with the Miners' Library here, but obviously the creative relationships you've also established in Upper Vale, what sorts of link-outs have been possible? Well, there hasn't been a great deal of kind of direct stuff, I suppose. I mean, we made contributions to what we hoped would be the kind of musical safeguarding of up-and-coming bands in Ebbw Vale by kind of doing practical things like donating some equipment and making sure that when we did our kind of launch shows there that we asked local bands to support us and try and kind of get behind the community in that way. I think we do hear a lot that teachers, especially primary school teachers, do use our material for kind of assemblies or for talks or to kind of, as a good way of kind of, you know, giving children a kind of gateway into a subject, I suppose. And a lot of that tends to be kind of self-propelled, I suppose. And we don't really necessarily get involved or even asked about it, which I'm absolutely chuffed that people are interested in it, let alone using it as inspiration in that way. But we haven't had much kind of direct activity either from our side or kind of being asked by communities here to get involved. I think what we've tried to do from our side is on the musical side of things to make sure that we continue to kind of come back to the area as much as we can. You know, we came back for a week of kind of gigs in the valleys in 2018 to kind of go to some of these institutions and make sure that we were kind of paying our dues, you know, in more than one way, and just to kind of, I suppose, be open to the possibility of that happening in the future. If anyone were to come up with an interesting proposal that could be of use to anyone, then we'd be happy to hear it. My email's on our website. It's very easy to find, which people do occasionally use for nefarious purposes. But if anyone has any interesting suggestions for collaborations, I'm always willing to hear them. Thank you.
Well, I'm conscious of time, so I think we'll draw this to a close. Thank you so much for coming. You very, very graciously thanked me for a lot of their help when you were at the Miners' Library, but I also want to pay tribute to a couple of my colleagues who are here, in particular Rhian Phillips and Mandy Orford, who were also, along with Julie Kame, working behind the scenes to help and sort the license out and contact everybody, and they were absolutely amazing. So thank you to them. And while I'm on the thanks, I just want to, it's just so wonderful to see so many friends and of the South Wales Miners' Library here, former colleagues as well. It's just really, really lovely to see you here, so thank you for coming. I want to thank the events team for all their help in organising the lecture, to Dr. Elaine Canning for all her help at the Cultural Institute, and Matthew Hughes, and to all the interns as well at the Cultural Institute. Thank you so, so much for all your help and support. To my colleagues in libraries and collections, to Robin, thank you again for all your help. And a special thanks again to the amazing, amazing team at the South Wales Miners' Library, who have been working so hard and have been constant support over so many years. So Mandy, Rhian, Karen, Joe, Meg, Jonathan, thank you so much for everything. It's a real team effort. But finally, we have to thank Mr. J. Willgoose, Esquire. Thank you for your absolutely fascinating talk. Of course, we feel, we only saw that small glimpse of getting that record, your album, which actually I think it went to number 4, didn't it, in the album charts?
It did.
Yeah, it did. And, you know, we were so proud to have that little, you know, that small part in this, its success. But it also opened our eyes up to how our collections could be used more creatively. And you know, it's just really helped us as we've moved on in our journey. And I think it will, as we look forward to the next 50 years, think about how we can use our collections and get our collections out there, because they are there to be listened to and to be used. So thank you very, very much for coming all the way, getting stuck in traffic, but persevering and coming and joining us this evening. Thank you. And to everyone, diolch yn fawr. Thank you for coming, and nos da.